Okay, also welcome from my side. Let me briefly introduce myself. Rob Aaldijk. I'm working as a product manager with Xillio for slightly over a year now. Previously, having worked with a lot of global consultancy companies like Cognizant, Accenture. Basically focusing for my complete career over 27 years now in information management on content management. And also content migrations for a large part of that, and including the governance, the compliance, the replatforming, what have you. Over the years, seen many technologies come and go, and it's interesting to see those trends, and always happy to share about that. And today we would like to talk a lot actually about the term compliance and what does it mean for adopting a platform like Microsoft 365. Of course, we've all experienced COVID. Who hasn't? Maybe some remote island in the Caribbean, but most of us have. And we've been relying on technologies like Microsoft Teams, and gradually discovering that the digital way of working is much more than just putting on a chat. You have to manage documents, conversations, all of that. And while we are shifting basically the core of our communications to such online platforms, also the compliance needs to increase, because sometimes our conversations and our sharing of documents is confidential, and we don't want to lose that information or corrupt it or in any way compromise it. So let's say the urgency for compliance has risen also by some modern trends. I will explain a bit. So today I will be kind of focusing a bit on the general compliance aspect of this. Slightly introduce the archiving and records management, which is going to be the focus area for today. I will also talk about compliant migration, but in the interest of time, not go into too much depth for that. If you're really interested in the very nitty-gritty details of that, I would say please share that demand. I saw one question specifically about that. There's a lot more to say about it, but I wanted to make the specific connection between content migrations and compliance today. So that's my focus. So I'm going to introduce the subject a bit before we get into details with Rob Barth, and certainly with Erica, who's going to give a live demo of the Compliance Center and specifically for the records management. And I'm going to set the stage for you. So if you have any questions about this, do share them. Happy to reflect, and otherwise get back to you offline if needed. So let's kick this off. Compliance, probably stating the obvious, but just to make sure we have a shared understanding. There's certainly a difference between general business compliance, which we see, which can range all the way from global references like the human rights, up till very specific ones on, for instance, records management, certain ISO standards, information security standards, very much in demand now, the Privacy Act implementations, and I think in some cases for the UK also some Brexit consequences of exporting data, for instance. So that's more generic. That will go cross industries, government, commercial, what have you. And then, of course, on top of this, there is industry-specific compliance. I picked out, for instance, for the financial services industry. Some of you will actually be joining from that background. The SEC, the AFM. We, for instance, do a big project for the UK FCA, Financial Conduct Authority, etc. And there's European rules and regulations also to take in. So a vast field of compliance with sometimes overlapping or even contradicting demands, and it's very difficult to apply these to the full field of your organization processes and information management. Increasingly a burden on the organization, and I know, for instance, a Dutch bank who now spends 14 million euros each year on staying compliant, and that is apart from becoming compliant, which they did a few years ago after the financial crisis. So these are hefty sums, but also the consequences can be dear. So there's a reason for that. What we have seen is actually that Some global and also local trends are influencing the attention that compliance gets and needs. We've seen some global market events, the financial crisis, of course, still fresh. Some industrial disasters. I've personally witnessed a big resource company having to implement records management because of people even going to jail because they did not control their own numbers. Program that took 4 years, by the way, global organization. That was some years ago. And you can see that from these trends, actually compliance as a business function is being recognized and even gets attention on a corporate, on a board level. Board members wanting to make sure that the organization becomes and stays compliant as soon as possible, and basically from a risk management perspective. So programs will be put in place, are put in place to reach and maintain compliance. And these are no trivial programs. In some cases, if you start from scratch, it can take some years actually to reach a certain level, attaining lower information risks. And more compliance is even becoming a prerequisite for retaining what we call license to operate. So if you cannot prove your compliance, basically, for instance, in the financial industry, your license to operate will be revoked, or at least you risk it being revoked. For that reason, as it becomes increasingly a burden for the whole organization, or at least it's seen as that, people are looking for ways to automate the processes that are associated to reaching and maintaining compliance. And that has become a trend also in the information management industry, in the software industry, and now being coined as RegTech, so regulatory technology. There's even books being written about that. I have one myself. I'm pointing to my bookcase. It's actually called Regular Technology. So you can buy these books, you can read all about them, and they give you hints on how to construct such a program, what to focus on initially, and also how to make it mature and sustainable. And is literally becoming a separate industry within this domain. So also compliance-driven solutions are being brought to the market, and you can see compliance as a topic being addressed and adopted by the major vendors in this industry, including, for instance, Microsoft. In terms of metrics, so of course these vendors are interested in how much should we invest into this, how interesting is it for us. So that's the other side of the table, let's say, trying to support you, but what does it mean? And you can see that actually there's a specific focus in the market from certain industries. I mentioned financial industry, government, certainly important, healthcare. There's the regulatory industry like pharmaceuticals that are really interested. And anything that has, any organization that has information that has a compliance risk is basically interested. So this total market is now valued at over $31 billion, and that was in 2019, and expected to grow by 40% every year over year, until 2027 at least. That's how far they want to look at it. We also see the downside of things. Could be a bit of scare tactics, I think, sometimes, but it's a fact that increasingly penalties have been issued for compliance breaches. I think fresh in our minds are almost every week, fines being handed over to the big technology companies themselves that deal with a lot of our data, our personal data, like the Facebooks and the Googles of this world. Especially the privacy acts that have been installed to counter these effects are kicking in, and of course everyone has to invest into making sure that they're compliant with that particular perspective. There are others as well. Any questions, Ruud, while I was talking?
No, all good so far. I will make sure.
Hopefully crystal clear. Or maybe, as again, stating the obvious, but just want to make sure that we have an understanding of the same thing. So regulatory technology, it's about automating compliance. We as a company, we focus on content-centric compliance solutions. It's important to note that there is almost an eternal divide in information management between so-called structured data and unstructured data. So documents against maybe database records and transactional systems. There's no system in the market that will cover everything. So there's also a caveat. You will see, for instance, in the Microsoft platform, that we're also talking about content a lot, and the functionality that is trying to cover compliance for that is specific to managing content. So that breaks down into a few subdomains, if you want. Information governance, which is more about organizing the management of information in such a way that it's controllable. That might require a separate webinar because a lot to say about that. Defining the roles in the system and the processes and making sure you can report on those. Different topic, but very close to this one. For instance, sensitive content discovery. With the advance of technology, we get things like artificial intelligence, being able to use machine learning to discover any class of information that you want to monitor. For instance, GDPR sensitive data, so personal identifiable information, PII. Tag that after discovery and monitor that for its usage. So preventing the leakage of information. That's also close to more secure information security related technology like identity access management, data loss prevention, security monitoring. And then we have specialties like regulatory document management, which is specifically for the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry, health technology, which has very specific regulations to adopt. Records management, which is now becoming automated in the sense that as against managing a paper archive, the digital version offers quite a lot of technology solutions to make your life a lot easier as an archive manager or records manager. So we talk a lot about that today. And then compliant content migration. So it's a fact that if you want to manage information using these principles, it's kind of a prerequisite to have them at least as much as possible in the same platform. Like I said, it's very difficult to manage it across different systems because they have such different technological backgrounds, and still there's not a satisfactory solution available that would do that for you. However, talking about the Microsoft 365 platform, there's a lot of integration capabilities, and we ourselves, we specialize in compliant migrations, making sure that your critical content is actually moved towards the platform, making sure that the governance and the compliance is secured as well. E-discovery is a specialty, that's kind of the legal angle to it. So if you want to discover any sensitive information or information that could be related to a litigation case across all these different places where your information is stored, e-discovery is the solution. It will comb through your email, through all the documentation, conversations, etc., tag that, package it, report on it, and so legal SMEs can actually use that for driving a litigation or defending themselves, defending your organization against allegations. Talked about the other ones as more security related. We're not going to talk about that too much today. It's really about the records management part, which is the archiving and records management part. So if you're interested in the other topics, let us know. Also to sort of get your expectations clear. And we can also always tap into that. We did quite a few of these roundtables in the past. There's a lot of attention to this topic, and probably we'll have to organize quite a few more to cover it all. And Erica will probably say the same. There's so much ground to cover in this area alone, but that's why we focus a bit today. So what does this mean if we translate this to what Microsoft does? And we will see the details on records management in a sec, but in general, compliance, the first notion is, and that's very good that Microsoft picked it up in that way. I personally think compliance goes across any information which is managed in your platform. So that means that previously, where you had maybe for your Microsoft SharePoint a records management solution which only covered SharePoint, of course, Microsoft realized after some time that emails, files on OneDrive, even Yammer conversations, Teams conversations now might contain records as well, and also play a vital role in managing your compliance, because information security goes across all kinds of information. That's why they decided to focus all these functions into one environment called Compliance Manager. For the few ones of you that have implemented Microsoft 365 already, you might have come across this already. It requires extra licensing for sure, but it gives you the power to manage your compliance across all these information repositories and streams. Gives you insight, kind of dashboard wise, and also adds a checklist on to what extent you are already compliant according to quite a number of standards, including security standards. And you can see in the bottom, it gives you actually a score based on how many compliance points you achieved by actually implementing measures for each different issue or problem that you could encounter. Very powerful, very comprehensive, very controllable. And more and more functions are being released actually to kind of fine-tune this. I'm particularly interested in the information governance part. It gives you control over your content directly by quite a few different functions. It's about labeling, discovery, creating business rules basically to manage the life cycle of your content, etc. And we'll get to a bit more detail of that. So Compliance Center is the heart of reaching compliance when you have your information in the Microsoft 365 platform across all the applications that are part of that. So the components of that, explaining them one by one quickly to get an understanding, might be confusing at first, or at least looks complex because it covers so much. But you will see that there is a logic to it, and also it's important to note that a lot of these modules work together and reuse basically some elements of each other to make the management a lot more efficient. So starting with the first block, you have your information protection, which is essentially the labeling, and can be automatic labeling of sensitive information. This is definitely Privacy Act related. You will find that Microsoft supplies pre-configured models for recognizing any information that is relevant according to this act. So the personal identifiable information could be credit card formats, employee information, all kinds of sensitive stuff, medical terms, etc. And then the data loss prevention makes sure that this content that you discovered in this way or labeled in this way is actually secured. And when it's there's attempts to share it or inadvertently copy it, etc., out of the organization, it will alert actually to that fact, to that transaction, and make sure that it doesn't happen, or at least detect that there was a data breach, which is quite a feat in itself to do that automated. It's almost impossible, or it's impossible to monitor that yourselves nowadays, so it's very good that such a function is there as part of the platform. The records management will, yeah.
There is one remark in the chat that one attendee is running an AIP pilot at the moment.
Yeah,
so I don't know if there's a need to go into that in more detail, but at least we have people with experience in that.
Some experience, very good. Yeah, so I'm always happy to hear about that initial experience. These modules are very different basically in terms of background, although there are overlaps. They require specific attention and knowledge and expertise to have them implemented. If you have them all, yeah, you have the chance of becoming compliant in the platform. But it certainly takes an implementation program to do it properly. And there's also mistakes to be made. So good practice is very important to apply to this. And this is all relatively new. So you will see more and more experiences appear and documentation appear in the marketplace to take notice of and make sure you do the right thing. So I will skip the records management for now, but it's essentially about creating a file plan. So basically a plan to control your records, first identifying them by their definition, then making sure you put policies on them to manage their life cycle. A different corner of Compliance Center is about insider risk management. It has a bit to do with the data loss prevention and information protection, but it's not so much focused per se on Privacy Act. It can also be about discrimination, for instance, any sensitive keywords that you want to monitor, could be IP related. And it's basically making sure that the communication, for instance, in Teams is compliant and there's no breaches of your ethics and compliance policies. So very specific to that. And finally, we have discovery and response. So this is partially the very important part of compliance is being able to actually answer audits, so being able to conduct them yourselves internally. So this is kind of powerful search technology that also takes care of being able to identify certain types of information that you want to monitor or discover and bundle and analyze. And in terms of data, in the Privacy Act, you have the option now to manage data subject requests. So if any customer or partner asks for how you manage their information, what information you have on them, this function allows you to kind of process that request in a formal manner and report on the data you have on them in much detail. The e-discovery I already mentioned, that's the legal tool going across all the repositories of information and information streams to tag specific types that you want to use in a litigation case, for instance. Any questions about this? Right. I put the definitions in, you will get the slides afterwards. So for a comprehensive overview, you can look at this, and then there's always the deep dive in the Microsoft documentation, which goes very, very deep, including all the implementation steps and attention points. So feel free to explore from here or ask our advice on specific aspects, of course. Good. Then jumping to, from the notion of you're interested in using the Microsoft 365 platform as a way to, in a compliant manner, govern your information. Then what does that mean if you have a lot of information? I saw that from the survey. There's quite a few of you that are in that situation. And to be honest, I think 80% of our customers are in that situation, that your information is spread across a lot of different systems and locations. And it's very difficult actually to, at least it's not easy or not perceived as easy to gather them in one single platform, and how to organize that and making sure you can reap the benefits of that and start becoming compliant. So there is, at least from what we see in the market, a big hurdle towards adopting the platform as such, any platform, because of sometimes your legacy or the fact that you never applied governance to information that's very fragmented, etc. So how to deal with that? So we do migrations for over 17 years now for content specifically, and it's sometimes replatforming from one version to another version of a content management system. Sometimes it's the complete, or more often it's even the complete replatforming. And I must say that the last 5 years, we have seen the majority of the requests going to, can you migrate our content towards the Microsoft 365, the cloud platform? And what does that mean for us? So what is important to note is that, especially if you deal with compliance a lot, because you're either a regulatory organization or have to answer to a lot of compliant references, what does it mean to do a compliant migration? So making sure that, let's say, the move from A to B is secure, you can rely on it. And yeah, of course, what we see is, is it manageable in the sense that can it be done in a certain time frame and also within a certain budget? Now all these aspects together require quite some expertise and also a bit of analysis to make sure your expectations can be met. But what we do see is that there's an increasing request to make sure that during the migration, basically all the aspects are monitored and reported on in a compliant manner, so as to make sure that whenever you have an audit on the replatforming itself, you can actually prove that this move went in a secure manner and a compliant manner. So we offer the full traceability on that. It's an important principle. And if we look at the other aspect of this, is what does it make compliant? So what makes the process compliant? Well, it's both the data itself. So it can be data that is subject to government or industry regulations. It can include data that has privacy information in it, and you just don't know because you never analyzed that or you didn't tag it for such. Actually, you want to move it basically to the MS365 platform to start doing that. So we do acknowledge that, and we can help basically surface that kind of context also during the migration to make a head start with that and make sure that you migrate the right stuff and secure it in the right way. And also what is important, that content, well, that's typically files, but could also be a web page or whatever, a social media post, but typically it's documents in file format. It's not just about that. A lot of legacy systems that manage content allow you to apply so-called metadata, so to describe the content, and we have to make sure that that data describing the content is migrated to the new platform without losing information, or making sure that it's transformed in a compliant manner. And also other information like the access rules, the permissions, typically need to be migrated in a sensible way, so as to prevent data loss. So that's another very important compliance aspect of content migrations. Any questions about this? Because I will show you the process in a bit, but the principles I hope are clear, and I'm not sure if it's important for you to stress the compliance of content migration, but we see that in the majority of the projects that we do as an important point of attention, and we also test the process a lot for the same.
No questions in chat, Rob, but looking at the time, how much longer do you need? Okay, that's great.
So wanted to take you briefly to the process. So any migration that we do follow the same principle or approach. That means that what we do is we use specialized software to analyze or extract, analyze, transform, and actually import the content to your target system. So extract it from your source, import it into the target, and everything that goes between in a few discrete steps. And for each step, basically compliance is managed in a certain way. So for instance, if we extract information, we make sure that whatever is extracted is still in the same form and format of your original file and data. We use techniques like hashing for that. You can forget about that, but there are technologies that actually help you demonstrate that nothing has changed on a byte level in your files, and that actually all the data that you expected to be migrated was migrated. I think important, maybe you expect to do an analysis up front. What we do is we actually dump all the information you have in a certain model, an information model which is generic, which allows us to do analysis where it shows how much content do you have, how often is it used, is it obsolete or not, what's the privacy content of that, who is the owner, and all of that. maybe things that you never were able to extract yourself because governance and reporting left something to be desired still in your original system. So we can actually add that perspective and help you make the right decisions. So once you agree then on, okay, this is probably what we need to migrate, and there are maybe parts of your content that need to be migrated to an archiving solution because you're not actively using it anymore. So that is also something the analyst can show you, can save you some money in storage, obviously, and performance, having performance gains. Then you can do an actual selection and mapping of the information and its metadata to the new system, after which we will help you define transformation rules, validate those, and basically in each step provide you with the reports that show you what was migrated, how it was migrated, any exceptions, any issues that you can then deal with. And there's many technical issues that can happen, but the system monitors each and every of them. You can take action accordingly. So once we did the import, of course, with your, let's say, your business owners, the data owners, you should do a validation of if what was migrated was actually correctly done, if they can still find it, if all the data is there, including the metadata, if they can work with it, after which we will do some aftercare and close it. So this is typical for each and every content migration that we encounter, including the verification steps. Of course, there's a lot of specifics. If you do a SharePoint on-premise to SharePoint in the cloud, on SharePoint Online migration, it has different approaches than a cloud-to-cloud one, for instance, or from any legacy system to SharePoint Online, or including Teams sites, also possible, or email even. It means that sometimes you have to be creative on mapping, for instance, the information model you used in the old system to the one in the new system, because some terms are different, some principles are different, but we can share the experience to do that in a more standardized manner, kind of a good practice, and use kind of templates for that.
Yeah. Bob, you're like 12 minutes over time, so I
started late, of course. So introducing archiving and records management, I'm going to open the door for Rob Bath now. He can also pick this up a bit in his story, of course, but for me it's important that you see the link between archiving and records management. They're quite a lot used as one notion, but in practice, archiving relates more to the storage of information, and the records management is more a generic, more legal principle, meaning that you have to take control over the life cycle of your information. So making that a bit graphic. So the archiving relates to the information life cycle. So you create information, you store, you classify it, tag it, you use it, and then you archive it, and then still you can retrieve it from the archive until deletion. Now, records management is more about, can I identify records as evidence of a business transaction, which is quite a different definition. It doesn't necessarily cover all the information you manage, it's a subset. And the relationship with archiving is as soon as you need to store, keep, or prevent even a deletion of information for longer periods in time, archiving kicks in, because that's actually the long-term storage solution that you're looking for. So there's a distinct relationship between the two principles, but they're not the same. That's my final notion. Sorry for overshooting the time a bit, giving it back to